16 hours. One little heartbeat, and I'd do it all again.
You just saved a miracle.
They said she wouldn't survive. They were wrong.
Thank you for not giving up on me. Today, hope won. He actually did it.
Everyone said you wouldn't make it, but I never stopped believing.
You saved my life. 16 hours. And
The operating floor of St. Gabriel Medical Center had never been this quiet. More than 80 doctors, residents, nurses, and department chiefs stood frozen outside operating room 7. Dr. Adrian Cole had just completed a 16-hour surgery that saved a young girl's life. His surgical gloves were still stained. His hands were trembling from exhaustion. Before anyone could congratulate him, the elevator doors opened. His wife, Dr. Vanessa Cole, walked straight toward him. Without asking a single question, she snatched his hospital ID badge. Then, in front of every doctor in the hallway, she spoke 5 words that echoed through the entire medical center. "You're fired. Leave this hospital." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Adrian quietly removed his surgical cap, looked around the silent hallway, and calmly handed over his badge. No argument, no anger, no defense, because he knew something no one else in that building did. Within the next 24 hours, the woman who had just fired him would discover she had dismissed the only man with the legal authority to remove every executive, including her. And when the hospital board finally revealed the truth, every person standing in that hallway would wish they had never witnessed what happened that morning. Seattle, Washington. The rain had finally stopped. Morning sunlight reflected off the glass walls of St. Gabriel Medical Center, one of the most respected trauma hospitals on the West Coast. Helicopters landed almost every hour. Ambulances lined the emergency entrance. Inside, hundreds of doctors hurried through spotless white hallways. Every second mattered. Every decision could save or end a life. On the 7th floor, inside operating room 7, 40-year-old Dr. Adrian Cole removed his surgical gloves after completing a 16-hour emergency procedure. His blue scrubs were damp with sweat. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The 12-year-old girl lying on the operating table had arrived with catastrophic internal injuries after a ferry accident in Elliott Bay. 3 hospitals had refused the surgery. 2 surgeons had called it impossible. Adrian never did. He simply said, "Prep the operating room." Now, the heart monitor beeped steadily. The girl's breathing had stabilized. For the first time since midnight, she was going to live. A young surgical resident smiled with relief. "You actually did it." Another whispered, "I've never seen anyone repair an aorta that damaged." Adrian only nodded. She did the hard part. The body wanted to survive. He gently adjusted the girl's blanket before quietly walking toward the operating room doors. He never celebrated successful surgeries. Someone else's miracle should never become his trophy. Outside, nearly 30 doctors waited in the hallway, not because they had been told to, because whenever Adrian performed a difficult operation, everyone wanted to learn something. Dr. Emily Ross, head of pediatric surgery, walked toward him. "Beautiful work." He smiled politely. "We got lucky." Emily laughed. "No, the patient got lucky." Several residents quietly applauded. Adrian looked uncomfortable. "I still have charting." He started walking away. Recognition had never interested him. Results did. As he entered the physician's lounge, his phone vibrated. Dad Redheart. He smiled immediately. Unlike work, that name always softened his face. He answered. "Morning." A cheerful little voice exploded through the speaker. "Daddy." 7-year-old Noah laughed. "I got another A." Adrian leaned against the wall. "I knew you would." "Did Grandpa help?" "No. I did it myself." Adrian laughed. "Even better." Another voice entered the call. "He's telling everyone." Adrian smiled wider. "Morning, Dad." His adoptive father, Samuel Cole, chuckled softly. "You sound tired." 16-hour surgery. You need sleep. I'll sleep tonight. Samuel became quiet. You promised Noah you'd be at the science fair. I'll be there. No matter what. I promise. Adrian never broke promises, especially to his son. 4 years earlier, life had looked completely different. Adrian wasn't famous. He wasn't respected nationwide. He was simply a trauma surgeon who happened to fall in love with another doctor. Dr. Vanessa Brooks. Brilliant, confident, fearless. They met during a disaster response training conference. She challenged everything he said. He challenged everything she believed. By sunset, they had argued through dinner. By sunrise, they were laughing over coffee. A year later, they married. First, their differences completed each other. Adrian believed medicine existed to heal people. Vanessa believed medicine should become the most efficient business possible. Neither realized, one day, those beliefs would destroy their marriage. Present day, Vanessa stepped out of a black luxury SUV wearing an immaculate white coat embroidered with gold lettering. Dr. Vanessa Cole, Chief Medical Officer. Staff members immediately greeted her. Good morning, Doctor. Morning, Dr. Cole. She acknowledged everyone with professional smiles, but rarely stopped walking. Efficiency, schedules, performance, everything had become a number. Inside the executive elevator, her assistant handed over a tablet. Today's board agenda. Vanessa scanned it quickly. Department budgets, trauma review, expansion proposal. Then she frowned. What is this? The assistant hesitated. Another complaint. Against Dr. Adrian Cole. Vanessa's expression hardened. Again. He ignored administrative approval before beginning emergency surgery. He exceeded operating costs. He authorized equipment purchases without finance approval. Vanessa sighed. He always thinks rules don't apply to him. The assistant carefully chose her words. He did save the patient. Vanessa looked out the elevator doors. Results don't excuse insubordination. Meanwhile, Adrian sat quietly in the hospital cafeteria. Not inside the doctor's dining room, the public cafeteria. He stirred a cup of black coffee while reviewing patient scans. A janitor pushing a cleaning cart accidentally bumped into the table. Coffee spilled across several reports. The older man immediately panicked. Oh my goodness! I'm so sorry. Adrian smiled. It's okay. He grabbed napkins himself. No harm done. The janitor looked relieved. I'll print new copies. No need. I already memorized them. The man laughed nervously. You doctors scare me. Adrian smiled. Only if we're doing our jobs wrong. Several nurses watched from nearby tables. One whispered, He's the only surgeon who actually knows everyone's name. Another nodded. He even remembers housekeeping birthdays. Respect couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned. Elsewhere, on the top floor executive conference room, Vanessa addressed 12 department directors. The hospital is growing, but our spending isn't sustainable. She pressed a button. Financial charts appeared. We're eliminating unnecessary expenses. Cardiologist raised his hand. What about trauma? It costs the most. Vanessa answered immediately. Exactly. Another doctor frowned. Trauma also saves the most lives. Vanessa remained calm. This hospital must survive financially before it can save anyone. Some nodded. Others remained silent. Late afternoon, Adrian walked toward the pediatric wing carrying a small stuffed astronaut. Room 714. The young girl from surgery smiled weakly as he entered. You came back. I promised. She hugged the toy. Everyone said I'd never walk again. Adrian pulled up a chair. They were wrong. Her mother suddenly grabbed his hand, crying. You gave me my daughter back. Adrian gently squeezed her hand. No. She fought her way back. I just helped. Neither of them noticed. Someone watching through the small glass window. Vanessa. She had witnessed the entire conversation. For one brief moment, She almost smiled. Then her assistant stepped beside her. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Vanessa looked away. Professional duty replaced personal emotion once again. She turned and walked toward the executive floor, completely unaware that by tomorrow morning, one decision, made in front of the entire hospital, would begin the collapse of everything she had spent years building. The next morning, St. Gabriel Medical Center was busier than ever. Doctors hurried between operating rooms. Residents reviewed patient files. Nurses rushed medication carts through crowded hallways. No one noticed that the hospital's executive floor had become unusually tense. Inside the board conference room, Vanessa stood before a giant digital screen. Today's agenda contained only one highlighted item: Trauma Department Cost Review. She adjusted her glasses. For the third consecutive quarter, the Trauma Department has exceeded its allocated budget. Several executives exchanged nervous looks. Vanessa continued. Specifically, emergency surgeries approved without administrative authorization. The chief financial officer nodded. Our losses exceed $18 million. A board member frowned. But trauma also generates our highest patient survival rate. Vanessa answered without hesitation. This is a hospital, not a charity. Silence followed. No one challenged her. Not because they agreed, but because she had become the most influential executive in the building. Meanwhile, Adrian was already back inside Trauma Bay 3. A construction worker had arrived after falling 4 stories. Internal bleeding, collapsed lung, multiple fractures. The emergency physician looked terrified. We're losing him. Adrian glanced at the monitors. Prep or 5. A young administrator suddenly stepped into the room. Doctor, you need executive approval. Adrian never looked away from the patient. He's dying. It's hospital policy. Adrian calmly removed the clipboard from the administrator's hands. You can explain policy after he survives. He pushed the patient's bed toward surgery. The administrator stood frozen. 3 hours later, the operation succeeded. Another life saved. Another impossible case completed. As Adrian exited the operating room, the administrator waited outside, holding a yellow envelope. Dr. Cole, you've been instructed to attend today's executive review meeting. Adrian accepted the envelope. What time? 1 o'clock. At exactly 1 o'clock, every department chief gathered inside the hospital's main auditorium. Nearly 100 physicians occupied the seats. Department heads, residents, nurses, board members. The annual performance review normally celebrated medical achievements. This year, the atmosphere felt different. Vanessa stood behind the podium, professional, confident, completely in control. Good afternoon. Today's meeting concerns accountability. Large financial graphs appeared behind her. Our mission is to save lives. But without discipline, we save no hospital. The audience listened quietly. Then, she called the first name. Dr. Adrian Cole. Every head turned. Adrian slowly stood from the 3rd row, still wearing blue surgical scrubs. His hands carried fresh marks from surgery. He calmly walked toward the stage. Vanessa looked directly into his eyes. No warmth. No sign they were husband and wife. Only authority. She opened a thick personnel file. In the last 6 months, you ignored financial authorization 8 times. You exceeded equipment budgets. You approved emergency procedures without executive approval. You repeatedly refused administrative directives. Adrian answered calmly. I treated emergency patients. Vanessa nodded. I know. You also ignored protocol. He remained silent. She continued. This hospital cannot operate. If every physician creates their own rules. A cardiologist shifted uncomfortably. Several nurses looked at one another. Everyone knew, if Adrian had followed protocol, many of those patients would already be dead. Vanessa took one slow breath. This review is complete. She removed an identification lanyard from the podium. Then, in front of every doctor, she extended her hand. Your badge. The entire auditorium froze. Nobody expected this. Adrian looked at her quietly. You want it. Immediately, a resident whispered, She's firing him? Another answered, In public. Emily Ross stood up. This isn't right. Vanessa raised her hand. Sit down. Emily reluctantly obeyed. The room became painfully silent. Adrian slowly removed his hospital identification badge. He looked at it for a long moment. 20 years. Thousands of surgeries. Hundreds of lives. Countless nights without sleep. Everything represented by one small plastic card. He placed it into Vanessa's hand. Without anger. Without argument. Without even trying to defend himself. Vanessa announced clearly, effective immediately. Dr. Adrian Cole is relieved of all clinical duties at St. Gabriel Medical Center. Gasps echoed throughout the auditorium. One young nurse began crying. A senior surgeon quietly lowered his head. Adrian simply nodded. If that's your decision, I'll respect it. He turned and walked toward the exit. Not once did he look back. The heavy auditorium doors closed behind him. Inside, nobody spoke. Even Vanessa felt something strange. She had expected resistance, arguments, embarrassment. Instead, she received silence. The kind of silence that made victory feel uncomfortable. Outside, Adrian walked into the employee parking garage. Rain clouds gathered above Seattle once again. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. This is Adrian. An elderly voice spoke calmly. Dr. Cole. It's Arthur Sinclair. Adrian stopped walking. He hadn't heard that name in almost 5 years. Mr. Sinclair. I heard what happened. Adrian smiled faintly. News travels fast. Arthur's voice remained calm. I asked you one favor 20 years ago. You accepted without asking my name. You saved my granddaughter. I never forgot. Adrian looked across the skyline. I was just doing my job. Arthur chuckled softly. You always say that. Then his tone changed. I think it's finally time. Adrian frowned. Time for what? Arthur answered with only 6 words. To tell them the whole truth. Before Adrian could respond, the call ended. He stood motionless beneath the gray Seattle sky. He knew exactly what Arthur meant. A truth locked away for 2 decades. A truth that had never belonged to Adrian alone. And by tomorrow, the entire hospital board would finally hear it. Rain drizzled across downtown Seattle. Adrian sat alone inside a small waterfront coffee shop overlooking Elliott Bay. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't wearing a hospital badge. The waitress approached cautiously. Another coffee, doctor? He smiled politely. Just Adrian now. She looked uncomfortable. You'll always be our doctor. Before he could answer, his phone vibrated again. A single message. Board meeting. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Attendance required. Arthur Sinclair. Adrian quietly locked his phone. He had hoped that day would never come. Across town, inside the executive office, Vanessa stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Seattle's skyline usually calmed her. Today, didn't. Her assistant entered carrying a folder. Congratulations. Vanessa looked confused. For what? The board approved your restructuring plan. She nodded. Good. But the assistant hesitated. They haven't announced Dr. Cole's replacement. They're waiting. For what? I don't know. Vanessa frowned. Nothing about the board's behavior felt normal. Meanwhile, inside the physician's lounge, doctors gathered around silently. Nobody laughed. Nobody discussed patients. Instead, every conversation centered on one question. Why didn't Adrian fight back? Dr. Emily Ross folded her arms. Because he isn't interested in winning arguments. A cardiologist shook his head. I've worked with him 15 years. He would have challenged that decision. Emily slowly looked toward the empty locker that once belonged to Adrian. No, he only argues when someone's life depends on it. Late that afternoon, Samuel Cole watched Noah building a model volcano for the school science fair. The 7-year-old looked up. "When's Dad coming home?" Samuel forced a smile. "Soon," he promised. Samuel quietly nodded. He always keeps promises. The front door opened. Adrian walked inside carrying a paper bag. Noah ran across the living room. "Dad!" Adrian lifted him into his arms. "You finished the volcano?" Noah grinned proudly. "It's going to explode." Adrian laughed. "I can't wait." Samuel watched them silently. He noticed something. For the first time, Adrian had come home before sunset. Without scrubs. Without his hospital bag. Without saying a word. Samuel already understood. That evening, after Noah fell asleep, Samuel placed 2 cups of coffee on the kitchen table. "You were fired." It wasn't a question. Adrian nodded once. Samuel sighed. "You angry?" "No." "Hurt?" "A little." "You going back?" Adrian looked out the rain-covered window. "I don't know." Samuel studied his son carefully. "You've been hiding something." Adrian smiled faintly. "You always could tell." Samuel leaned forward. "Is it about Arthur Sinclair?" Adrian looked surprised. "You know?" Samuel chuckled softly. "I knew 20 years ago. The day that old man walked into this house. 20 years earlier, Adrian had been only 20 years old. A second-year medical student. Still struggling to pay tuition. One rainy evening, a terrible highway collision flooded Harborview Medical Center with victims. Doctors were overwhelmed. Families cried throughout the emergency department. Among the injured was a frightened 10-year-old girl. Massive internal bleeding. No available trauma surgeon. No operating room. No time. While experienced doctors argued over logistics, young Adrian noticed something everyone else missed. The girl's airway was collapsing. Without waiting for permission, he grabbed emergency equipment. A senior physician shouted, "You're just a student." Adrian ignored him. He followed instinct. Minutes later, the trauma team arrived. Because Adrian had acted first, the girl survived. Nobody asked who she was. Nobody cared. Except one elderly man, standing quietly at the end of the hallway. Arthur Sinclair. The next morning, Arthur found Adrian studying anatomy before class. He placed a small envelope on the desk. "Thank you." Adrian pushed it back. "I wasn't helping you. I was helping her." Arthur smiled. "Exactly." Before leaving, he said something Adrian never forgot. "The world rewards successful people. I reward good people." Present day, Samuel reached inside an old kitchen cabinet. He removed a faded wooden box, placed it gently on the table. Adrian looked down. "I haven't seen that in years." Samuel opened it. Inside rested a single brass key and a sealed envelope, untouched. Arthur's handwriting covered the front. To be opened only if Adrian Cole ever loses everything. Samuel pushed it toward him. "I think today qualifies." Adrian hesitated. Slowly, he broke the seal. Inside, only one page. No legal language. No contracts. Just one handwritten sentence. "If they ever judge your value by your position instead of your character, bring this letter to the board. The truth belongs to them now." Attached behind the letter was another document. Stamped. Notarized. Official. Adrian's eyes widened. He hadn't seen it before. Samuel quietly smiled. "I told you." Arthur never forgets a promise. The next morning, inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, every executive had already taken a seat. Vanessa adjusted the agenda. She frowned. "This isn't today's schedule." The board secretary nodded nervously. "It changed overnight." "By whose authority?" The secretary swallowed hard. "Mr. Arthur Sinclair." The room immediately became silent. Vanessa looked confused. "Arthur Sinclair? The founder? I thought he retired years ago." Before anyone answered, the conference room doors slowly opened. An elderly man with silver hair entered. walking with a polished wooden cane. Every board member immediately stood. No one had seen Arthur Sinclair in public for almost 5 years. He looked around the room calmly, then asked one question. Has Dr. Adrian Cole arrived yet? Vanessa's heartbeat suddenly quickened. For reasons she couldn't explain, she realized this meeting was no longer about budgets. The boardroom fell completely silent. Arthur Sinclair slowly walked toward the head of the table. Every executive remained standing. Even the people who had spent decades working beside him lowered their heads respectfully. Vanessa watched in disbelief. She had read about Arthur Sinclair. She had studied his leadership. But this was the first time she had ever stood in the same room with the man who had built the Sinclair Health Foundation into one of the largest nonprofit medical systems in America. Arthur rested both hands on his cane. Please, sit down. No one moved until he sat first. Only then did the room breathe again. Vanessa cleared her throat. Mr. Sinclair, we're honored by your visit. Arthur smiled politely. I didn't come for introductions. I came for the truth. He looked toward the board secretary. Is Dr. Adrian Cole here? The doors opened once more. Adrian walked inside. Simple navy suit. No doctor's coat. No hospital badge. No expression of anger. He quietly nodded toward the room. Several doctors immediately stood. Dr. Emily Ross, the chief of cardiology, the head of emergency medicine. One after another, nearly every physician rose to their feet. Not because they had been instructed, because respect couldn't be voted on. Vanessa looked around the room. She suddenly realized she was one of the only people still sitting. Slowly, she stood as well. Arthur looked at Adrian. You still don't like attention. Adrian smiled faintly. I never did. Arthur chuckled. I know. He turned toward the board. 20 years ago, my granddaughter was dying. No surgeon was available. No executive could solve the problem. No policy could save her. The room remained silent. Arthur continued. A second-year medical student ignored every rule because he cared more about a little girl's heartbeat than hospital paperwork. He pointed gently toward Adrian. That student was him. Vanessa slowly looked toward Adrian. Her breathing became uneven. Arthur removed a small leather folder from his briefcase. I promised him that day, if he ever needed me, I would stand beside him. The board chairman accepted the folder. He carefully opened it. Inside were notarized legal documents, signed 20 years earlier. The chairman adjusted his glasses. His expression changed immediately. He looked toward the room. I believe everyone deserves to hear this. He began reading aloud. By irrevocable trust agreement, the governing voting authority of St. Gabriel Medical Center shall permanently belong to Dr. Adrian Cole, effective upon completion of his surgical residency, until such time as he voluntarily resigns or transfers the trust. Gasps echoed throughout the boardroom. Vanessa's hands began trembling. The chief financial officer whispered, My God! The chairman continued, No executive, including the chief medical officer, may terminate the trustee or remove his clinical privileges without unanimous trustee approval. The room became completely silent. Arthur quietly spoke. Yesterday, the only person with legal authority over this hospital was fired. Vanessa couldn't believe what she was hearing. She slowly turned toward Adrian. You never told me. Adrian answered calmly. You never asked. Her eyes filled with tears. Why would you keep something like that secret? He looked around the room. Because hospitals shouldn't belong to powerful people. They should belong to patients. I accepted responsibility, not status. The chairman stood. As board chairman, I declare yesterday's termination null and void. He looked toward Adrian. Your position is fully restored. The room erupted into applause. Doctors who had remained silent the day before now stood proudly. Residents smiled. Nurses wiped tears from their eyes. Emily Ross quietly whispered, "I knew it." Adrian raised one hand. The applause stopped immediately. "I don't want celebrations. I want something better." Everyone looked at him. He slowly walked toward Vanessa. She couldn't lift her eyes. "I embarrassed you," she whispered. "No, I embarrassed myself." Her voice broke. "I stopped seeing people. I only saw numbers." Adrian nodded gently. "Then learn to see people again." She looked at him. "Can you forgive me?" The room waited. Adrian answered honestly. "Forgiveness isn't difficult. Trust takes longer." Vanessa silently nodded. "I understand." Arthur smiled. "This hospital has spent too many years measuring success by profit." He looked toward the board. "Beginning today, no emergency surgery will ever require financial approval." Every trauma doctor smiled. "The finance department will answer one question. Can we save them? If the answer is yes, you spend whatever is necessary." The board unanimously approved the motion. For the first time, the room applauded for patience, not budgets. 3 months later, St. Gabriel Medical Center became the first major nonprofit hospital in Washington to remove financial authorization requirements from all life-saving emergency procedures. Trauma survival rates reached record highs. Doctors from across the country traveled to study the new system. Medical journals called it the Cole Protocol, not because it was revolutionary, because it reminded hospitals of something they had forgotten. Human life could never be measured on a balance sheet. Vanessa voluntarily stepped down as chief medical officer, not because anyone forced her, because she believed leadership had to be earned again. She returned to treating patients as a full-time physician. Every morning, she walked the emergency department, listening, learning, changing, one patient at a time. One evening, Adrian stood on the hospital rooftop overlooking Seattle. Arthur joined him quietly. "You know." Arthur smiled. "You could have removed everyone yesterday." Adrian looked toward the city lights. "I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to protect the hospital." Arthur nodded proudly. "That's exactly why. I trusted you with it." As the sun disappeared behind Puget Sound, doctors hurried through the emergency entrance below. Helicopters landed once again. Lives were still being saved. Buildings still stood. Machines still beeped. But one thing had changed forever. No doctor would ever again have to choose between saving a patient and asking permission from a spreadsheet, because the greatest owner a hospital could ever have was never the richest person in the room. It was the one who never forgot that every heartbeat was priceless. The end.